Well, I suppose we're recording now. We're looking at engineering ethics today, and to do that, we're going to go to the National Society of Professional Engineers webpage, which is, of course, right here. So, what we want to do is explore this webpage, kind of read through the Code of Ethics, discuss it a little bit, and talk about why this is so important to engineers. On this webpage, the Society of Professional Engineers is essentially it's a group of engineers that any engineer can join, and most civil engineers and many mechanical engineers do join this society. They send out publications, and they give grants and other things like this, but one of the most important things they do is they oversee engineering. And we have seen this before when we looked at the history of engineering, and we saw the code of for building houses and buildings for other people, if you remember that from our history of engineering presentation we had about a week ago, I guess. And in here they do a very similar thing. They've laid out a set of rules and laws, bylaws, you might think of them as, that engineers are supposed to follow and that they will be held responsible for as they are doing their engineering jobs. And this website has the Code of Ethics, which is actually that set of bylaws, but it also has a page for the Board of Ethical Review, which is a group of people that are experts in this Code of Ethics, have a lot of experience with it, and they make decisions concerning how this Code of Ethics should be upheld. They hear cases, they make judgments, but they also determine if something needs to be added or changed in the Code of Ethics. And then there's this Ethics Resources page, which is a lot of journals and publications and videos and other things. And then there are on-demand courses as well. We're going to mostly spend our time looking at these two here, Code of Ethics, Board of Ethical Review, and we'll get to Ethics Resources in a little bit. On-demand courses require us to have a password, and I don't have one at the moment, but we will go ahead and get started here. So the Code of Ethics for Engineers, the NSPE Code of Ethics for Engineers, starts off with a preamble, and I'm going to try to zoom in here a little bit here if I can make it happen. Zoom in. Let's go ahead and do that. So we have it has a preamble, reads a little bit like a constitution would, and then it has these fundamental canons, of which there are 6 in the first section. In the second section has rules of practice, which are some details essentially about how engineers should uphold these fundamental canons, except for the last one. The last of these fundamental canons is kind of generalized, and so it covers a lot of things. And the last section, the professional obligations, covers a lot of those things and just a lot of things in general about how engineers should behave in their lives. In their professional lives, but even in a little bit in their personal lives. And then they have a little bit of revision down here at the end, and then it's over. It's not very long, and that's on purpose. The reason they don't want it to be very long is because they don't want people to have to really study this thing for hours at a time and read it and read it and read it. They want engineers and other people who are concerned with the ethics of engineers to be able to look very quickly and say, this is how engineers should behave. So let's read through this a little bit. We'll start off with the preamble. Engineering is an important and learned profession. As members of this profession, engineers are expected to exhibit the highest standards of honesty and integrity. It starts off right away with honesty and integrity, which is, quite frankly, a very difficult thing for most people. You know, most people are very prone to telling little white lies or stretching the truth a little bit. Just those little things that don't really hurt anybody. But the problem is, in engineering, those things can hurt people. And so as engineers, we really need to get used to and make it a habit and a part of our lifestyle, make it a part of our personality, to be completely honest. always, in every little thing, so that we're not tempted to just be a little bit dishonest here or there, where it could cost somebody's life. Because engineers have that power. Engineering has a direct and vital impact on the quality of life for all people. Accordingly, the services provided by engineers require honesty. Again, they talk about honesty. Require honesty, impartiality, fairness, and equity. Impartiality, fairness, and equity are very similar things, but really we do need to approach things without prejudice. We need to approach things fairly. We need to think about things without having some kind of preconceived idea, so that we can make the best decision from an engineering standpoint. So again, we don't hurt people. Must be dedicated to the protection of the public health, safety, and welfare. This last sentence is important. Engineers must perform under a standard of professional behavior that requires adherence to the highest principles of ethical conduct. Engineers are professionals, and they need to behave that way. We need to behave that way. Many years ago, it used to be that if you met somebody who had been to college, you were very likely meeting an engineer. And so many of the people that had a higher education or a higher level of education were engineers, and they behaved that way for the most part. People with a higher education tended to behave at a little higher level. They had a higher level of speech, they had a higher level of physical behavior. They were just trying to be a little bit better than they would have been otherwise. Nowadays, a lot of people have a college education or a higher education, and so it's become very commonplace. And so it's not uncommon to go out among people with college degrees and experience really unprofessional behavior, unprofessional speech, use of really crude words or crude language and crude jokes or crude whatever. Things that are just not very professional and frankly just not very civilized. And that kind of behavior, you just can't have that with an engineer. Engineers need to live on a little bit higher a plane because they're doing work that is very important. And if you have a bad image as an engineer because of the way you behave, you're going to have a hard time performing professionally because people will not trust you. They will not believe that you are worthy of such an important position, and then you will essentially be pushed out of the profession because people don't trust and people aren't willing to work with you. So it's important. These things are important. And that's a very general statement, the preamble. It's talking about a lot of things, but saying it with just a very few words. So they get into a little more detail with their fundamental canons. In the fulfillment of their professional duties, engineers shall hold paramount the safety and health, welfare of the public. So that's been said, but they're saying that it's going to be the most important thing. You hold that paramount, the safety, health, and welfare of the public. Then perform services only in areas of their competence. Engineers need to do what they're trained to do, where their education is, and where they have experience that is significant, and not just fly out there and try something out that they've never done before and put people in danger. They will issue public statements only in an objective and truthful manner. Again, that honesty thing comes up. Act for each employer or client as faithful agents or trustees. It's important to behave, to give the person that is paying you and is overseeing your work the best that you can. Avoid deceptive acts. Again, the honesty thing. Conduct themselves honorably, responsibly, ethically, and lawfully, so as to enhance the honor, reputation, and usefulness of the profession. That goes again with this standard of professional behavior, highest principles of ethical conduct, right? So we have these 6 canons, and we're going to address 5 of them in the rules of practice. We have 5 of these sections for rules of practice where they give more detail. For example, in engineers shall hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. How about engineers shall approve only those engineering documents that are in conformity with applicable standards. So engineers are always signing documents, signing drawings, signing whatever. Engineers shouldn't sign things like that unless they conform with what they should be doing. They say here that are in conformity with applicable standards. Essentially, that means that are in line with the law, that are in line with the city ordinances or the whatever. The engineers shouldn't put their stamp of approval on things that are not approved legally or in the correct process of what they're doing. That's just one example of a very specific thing that we can do, that engineers can do, to hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. Get down here to performing services only in their competence. C says engineers may accept assignments or assume responsibility for the coordination of an entire project and sign and seal the engineering documents for the entire project, provided that each technical segment is signed and sealed by only by the qualified engineers who prepared the segment. So you may have an engineer that's in charge of a whole project that has other engineers that are specifically in charge of specific technical areas. And those engineers who are experts in those particular areas should sign off on their areas before the engineer who's in charge signs off on everything, because he may not know everything about those specific areas of expertise. And there are many others. There are lots of others of these very specific examples, all the way through the part that says engineers shall avoid deceptive acts, which is the 5th canon. Then the 6th canon, of course, which says that engineers should conduct themselves honorably, responsibly, ethically, lawfully, and so on and so forth. That is addressed not only in this last professional obligations, but all through this, really, because it's a general statement. So this 3rd section covers a lot of things in general, but gives some pretty specific ways in which we can act as engineers. So here's one that says, engineers shall at all times strive to serve the public interest, for example. Number C says, engineers are encouraged to extend public knowledge and appreciation of engineering and its achievements. It doesn't say that engineers must do this, but they're encouraged to do this. And many engineers do this. Many engineers volunteer in the schools to do science shows, or volunteer to work on houses for Habitat for Humanity, or they do other things with the Boy Scouts or with the Girl Scouts or some other organization. They're out there in the community encouraging people to appreciate engineering, and that is certainly something that is a good idea. So each one of these sections, number 5, for example, says engineers shall not be influenced in their professional duties by conflicting interests. So here, A, engineers shall not accept financial or other considerations, including free engineering designs from material or equipment suppliers for specifying their product. So if an engineer goes to a company and says, we want to use your bolts for our project, then the engineer shouldn't accept any money for using those bolts. They should buy the bolts, they should buy them fair and square, and then take the bolts and go use them. The company shouldn't be bribing them to use their bolts, in other words. They should also, here's another one here. Engineers shall accept personal responsibility for their professional activities, and all these things here. It says, in part A, it says engineers shall conform with state registration laws in the practice of engineering. So they're obeying the laws, right? So there's just a lot of very specific things in here that they talked about for engineers things for them to do and things for them to avoid doing. So lots of good information on how to behave professionally and properly and ethically as an engineer. Now if we go back to our ethics section, we can look at the Board of Ethical Review part. And the Board of Ethical Review has a bunch of cases that we could actually take a look at. So they've got these engineering experts that are on this board. And let's see here. Yeah, here they have some cases that they've gone through. And let's take a look at one of these. Let's look at the first one. This is a conflict of interest case where a former government official is an independent contractor for a firm. So what we've got here, it looks like, let's take a look at it. So an engineer is a top official in the highway department. He wants to leave the highway department to become an executive with an architecture firm, but they're not allowing him to do that because you're not supposed to leave government and then go work for a company that works for the government, because then you'll have insider knowledge, you'll know people there, and you'll be able to get more advantage for that company. So instead of doing that, they say, this engineer says, well, what I'll do is instead of doing that, I'll go and I'll become an independent contractor. Right down here it says, instead of joining the architecture firm as an employee, he'll become an independent contractor, which means he works for himself, but he's doing work for this engineering company, and they're paying him as an independent contractor. He's not actually part of their company, he's just working with them, and they're paying him for that work. Well, as they go through this, the this board of ethics reviewer people, the board of ethical review, they figure out what the question is. Was it ethical for engineer P to leave the highway department, join the architecture and engineering firm, not as an employee but as an independent contractor? And then they go through the code of ethics and they find some different things that they think are important for this. They found in section 1.5 that engineers in the fulfillment of their professional duties shall avoid deceptive acts. Well, if he's not going as an employee because that's illegal, but he's kind of found a runaround or found a loophole so he can go as an independent contractor even though he's doing the same thing, that's a deceptive act. And then in section 2.4, they found engineers shall act for each employer or client as faithful agents or trustees. Well, okay, so are they acting as a faithful agent for their employer or for the government in either case when they left one to join the other? Maybe not. And then section 3.4a, they found that engineers shall not, without the consent of all interested parties, promote or arrange for new employment or practice in connection with a specific project for which the engineer has gained particular and specialized knowledge. So in other words, he had particular specialized knowledge when he worked for the highway department, and now he's going to work for the company that could be working for the highway department. So that's not very ethical according to these three sections. So they have some discussion and they talk about it, and they may call some people in to have them testify and get some information. They may look at some documents or whatever else is the case. And at the very end, they make a conclusion. In this case, they say the conclusion is that it is unethical for the engineer to join the architecture engineering firm as an independent contractor instead of as an executive employee, as an apparent way of circumventing state law. So they're saying that he's just trying to get around the law by becoming a contractor, and that is not ethical, and it will be. And then they can be punished, or they can be. I mean, they could even be. They could even be sued, or they could be imprisoned, even if it's a bad enough offense. Probably not for this one. But anyway, that is the idea. They probably just refuse to allow him to become an employee in any way of this company, and that's all there is to it. So this is kind of what the ethics of engineering is all about, is to make sure that people are not taking advantage of other people or of situations or doing something that's going to cause harm or danger or whatever to either people or the world in general or to engineering. Engineering needs to be protected so that people will trust engineers. And that's what the Board of Ethics is partially doing. They're protecting not only the world from bad engineering, but they're protecting engineering from getting a bad reputation. And both of those things are quite important. So, and there are other ones here. For example, here's one about licensure for having a license. You have an engineering intern, which is essentially a student, and they're leading a project as an engineering firm. Well, that shouldn't be the case, probably because engineering interns are not full-fledged engineers. They haven't finished their schooling. They haven't been licensed. This company, this organization, the National Society of Professional Engineers, actually certifies engineers by giving a test called the Professional Engineering Exam, the PE exam. And civil engineers, almost all of them take this exam, and many mechanical engineers take this exam, and some others as well, where they take this exam and they become an official professional engineer when they pass it, and they're showing the engineering world essentially that they are ready, that they've learned what they need to learn to go out and get the experience that they need. So the Society of Professional Engineers not only does the ethics, but it also certifies engineers, so they are they're considered real bona fide engineers. Here's another one: an engineer's obligation to consider feasible options. Right? In this case, probably there was an engineer who was designing something and didn't consider one of the options for the design that they were making. That was maybe a really good option. They didn't consider it for some reason. Maybe they didn't consider it because they would have to use a company that they didn't like, or maybe they didn't want to consider it because they wouldn't make as much money as they would with the other option. That happens all the time. So there's a lot of reasons to file a complaint for bad ethics in engineering, and there you can see here that there are many of them, many of these things. Now in the other parts of this, there's education and publications for ethics, and they've got some study guides and some forums here and some committee reports and things you can look at. There are also videos you can watch on engineering ethics. We won't watch one now, most of them are around 30 minutes. And then there's an ethics exam you can take to see if you really understand ethics. I believe that you have to, I think you have to log in for that. Well, maybe see. No, this is actually the exam right here. So the one that you have to log in for is actually the You Be the Judge and the on-demand courses. But if you go to the You Be the Judge here, they give you some situations where you can decide whether something is ethical or not. And you have to log in to do this, but here's one, a sample one we can do. Let's take a look at it. Here we have a firm that's hired by this client, and they're providing engineering design services in connection with the client's building. So they're calling this name Clint, but it's actually client, but anyway. So we've got this this engineering firm. They've been hired by this person to do some engineering services, some engineering design and construction, and then it turns out that the engineering firm who's being hired, they want to hire construction people to come and build their design. And one of the construction people comes back to the engineering firm and says, "We'll pay you if you will oversee some of our processes, and wink, wink, nod, nod, you'll give us this job." So in other words, one of the companies that they're thinking of hiring to do the building of the project is actually kind of making a side deal to give money back to the engineering firm if they get chosen for some services that they provide to the building company. So it's kind of like money is going two ways. Whenever money is going two ways, or money's going one way and favors are going another way, usually there's some ethics problems involved, except in politics. That's just accepted practice. But in engineering, it's not accepted practice. So the engineering company is paying the building company to build. The building company is paying the engineering company to help them check on some of their processes. That's probably a thing to be worried about. So they go ahead and check it out, and they find several things that are related to this. So, for example, Section 1.5 says engineers in the fulfillment of their professional duties shall avoid deceptive acts. Again, engineers shall act for each employer or client as faithful agents or trustees. We've seen those two before. And this one here is important because it's very specific. Engineers shall disclose all known or potential conflicts of interest that can influence or appear to influence their judgment or the quality of their services. And 4B, which says engineers shall not accept compensation, financial or otherwise, from more than one party for services on the same project or for services pertaining to the same project, unless the circumstances are fully disclosed and agreed by all interested parties. So what we've got here is a company that is trading money back and forth with another company. That's clearly violating a couple of these things. So under the circumstances, they say in the conclusion, that's unethical for the engineering office to submit a proposal for engineering services and then also for the same project to receive money from the steel contractor that they've hired. So it's that's kind of how they do this. They figure out what is the question that needs to be answered. They look through the code, and they find things that are relevant or that are related to what they're looking at, and then they decide whether or not these things have been broken. And if enough of them have been broken, then usually they find that something unethical has happened or something has been broken so clearly that it's just obvious. So anyway, that is the idea behind the ethics of engineering. And they've given you some examples in your book, and I want you to go ahead and try to follow the same kind of pattern to decide whether or not ethics, there is some bad ethics going on in the examples that they've given you for the homework. And that's all I have for you today. and we will talk to you again. What's this today? Wednesday, so we'll be back again on Friday. Let's see, I think on Friday we're scheduled to maybe take an exam. Let's take a look at that. So yeah, we are actually scheduled to take an exam on Friday, so I'll have an exam ready for you on Friday to take, covering the first 3 chapters. And for the homework for this chapter, it's just problem 1, but I think it's a pretty big one. So, and then next week we're going to do a bridge project. So you're going to be receiving some stuff in the mail concerning the bridge project, some materials, and then we will get started on that. Have a good one.